Regulations pertaining to the use of force by law enforcement officers are outlined in Chapter 6 of the District of Columbia Code of Municipal Regulations, the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, and various other sections in the Official Code of the District of Columbia. Welcome to Safety First Firearms Training and Consultants. The DCMR provides guidance regarding a law enforcement officer's use of force, including, but not limited to, outlining the circumstances permitting appropriate levels of force, and imposing restrictions on firearm discharges. The Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution guarantees people the right to be secure in their persons and provides a framework in which the courts can evaluate the use of force by law enforcement officers, including the objective reasonableness standard established in Graham v. Connor, 490 U.S. 386, 1989. The purpose of this order is to outline when members may use force. The policy of the Metropolitan Police Department is to value and preserve the sanctity of human life at all times, especially when lawfully exercising the use of force. Therefore, MPD members shall use the minimum amount of force that the objectively reasonable officer would use in light of the circumstances to effectively bring an incident or person under control, while protecting the lives of the member or others. When using force, members shall continuously reassess the perceived threat in order to select the reasonable use of force response, or one that is proportional to the threat faced by him, her, or others. When used in this directive, the following terms shall have the meanings designated. 1. Active resistance. Physically evasive movements to defeat or deflect the member's attempts to control a subject, including but not limited to bracing, tensing, pushing, or verbally signaling an intention not to be taken into or retained in custody, provided that the intent to resist has been clearly manifested. 2. Carotid artery hold. Any technique which is applied in an effort to control or disable a person by applying pressure or force to the carotid artery or the jugular vein or the sides of the neck with the intent or purpose of controlling a person's movement, or rendering a person unconscious by constricting the flow of blood to and from the brain. 3. Less lethal weapon. Any object or device deployed with the intent or purpose of nullifying a threat without causing death, such as rubber bullets, oleoresin capsicum spray, and tactical batons. 4. Member sworn or civilian employee of MPD or MPD Reserve Corps member. 5. Non-deadly force. Any use of force that, when employed in accordance with department training, is neither likely nor intended to cause death or serious physical injury. 6. Objective reasonableness. The standard requiring the reasonableness of a particular use of force must be judged from the perspective of a reasonable member on the scene in light of the facts and circumstances confronting the member. 7. Resisted handcuffing occurs when a person actively resists being placed in handcuffs, and the member must forcibly move the person's wrists or arms, or physically maneuver the person's body so that the handcuffs can be applied. The resistance may range from an active struggle to a person simply locking his or her arms to prevent their being moved to the handcuff position. 8. Serious physical injury. Any injury or illness that results in admission to the hospital or that creates a substantial risk of death, serious disfigurement, loss of consciousness, disability, a broken bone, or protracted loss or impairment of the functioning of any body part or organ. Note: admission to the hospital must be directly associated with the use of force and should not include treatment or hospitalization for those injuries incurred prior to the use of force, such as drug or alcohol use or medical conditions like high blood pressure. (9) Serious use of force actions by members including A. All firearm discharges by a member with the exception of range and training incidents, and discharges at animals. B. All uses of force by a member resulting in a serious physical injury. C. All head strikes with an impact weapon. D. All uses of force by a member resulting in a loss of consciousness, or that create a substantial risk of death, serious disfigurement, disability or impairment of the functioning of any body part or organ. E. All incidents where a person receives a bite from an MPD canine. F. All uses of force by an MPD member involving the use of neck restraints or techniques intended to restrict a subject's ability to breathe. G. All other uses of force by a member resulting in a death. 10. Service weapon. Any instrument issued or authorized by the department that is used to control or overcome a subject, carried or kept readily available by MPD members. 11. Take-down maneuver in which a subject is forcibly brought to the ground. Trachea hold, also known as arm bar hold or bar arm hold, refers to any technique using the member's arm, a long or short police baton, or a flashlight or other firm object that attempts to control or disable a person. This is done by applying force or pressure against the trachea, windpipe, or the frontal area of the neck with the purpose or intent of controlling a person's movement, or rendering a person unconscious by blocking the passage of air through the windpipe. This is defined under the DC Official Code, Section 5-125.02. Use of force is any physical coercion used to affect, influence, or persuade an individual to comply with an order from an officer. It includes 1. Deadly force, 2. Serious use of force, 3. Use of a less than lethal weapon, 4. Any use of force indicating potential criminal conduct by a member, and 5. Any use of force resulting in injury or a complaint of injury or pain where the injury or pain is directly associated with a member's use of force. The following actions are designated as reportable force incidents as long as the use of force does not result in injury or a complaint of injury or pain. 1. All solo or team takedowns where there is no complaint of pain or injury, and 2. The drawing and pointing of a firearm at or in the direction of another person when no other force was used. It's important to note that minor injury or discomfort resulting from the application and general wearing of handcuffs is not, in and of itself, considered a reportable use of force or a reportable force incident. The use of force framework is an adaptation of the decision-making model, specifically applicable to situations potentially resulting in the use of force. This framework contains 5 categories of perceived threats and responses, all of which are fluid, dynamic, and non-sequential. It allows officers to determine which action or actions are objectively reasonable and proportional given the perceived threat. Use of force indicating potential criminal conduct by a member includes but is not limited to all strikes, blows, kicks, or other similar uses of force against a handcuffed subject. It also includes all accusations or complaints of excessive force made against the member. This encompasses any use of force that clearly goes beyond what an objectively reasonable officer would use in light of the circumstances under which the force was used, or any use of force which may rise to the level of a criminal act. Vehicle ramming attack is a form of attack in which a perpetrator deliberately rams or attempts to ram a motor vehicle at a crowd of people with the intent to inflict fatal injuries. All members who encounter a situation where the possibility of violence or resistance to lawful arrest is present shall, if possible, first attempt to defuse the situation through advice, warning, verbal persuasion, tactical communication, or other de-escalation techniques. Members shall attempt to defuse use of force situations with de-escalation techniques whenever feasible. When using force, members must be able to articulate the facts and circumstances surrounding their tactics, decision-making, and the extent of force used in any given situation. When any force response is employed, members shall 1. Conduct a visual and verbal check of the subject to ascertain whether the subject is in need of medical care. 2. Summon medical assistance immediately if a person is injured, complains of pain, or demonstrates life-threatening symptoms as established in Go-PCA-502.07, Medical Treatment and Hospitalization of Prisoners. 3. Render first aid as soon as the scene is safe. Any excessive force by a member may subject him or her to disciplinary action and possible criminal prosecution or civil liability. The use of force framework contains 5 categories of perceived threats and responses, all of which are fluid, dynamic, and non-sequential. Members' perception of the threat starts with a cooperative subject. This is when the subject responds in a positive way to a member's presence and is easily directed with verbal requests and commands. The subject who requires control or searching offers no resistance. Next, we have a passive resistor. This subject displays a low level of non-compliant resistance. The non-compliance is passive and offers no physical or mechanical energy. The subject does not respond to a member's lawful request or commands and may be argumentative. Then, there's the active resistor. This subject is uncooperative and will not comply with the member's requests or comments. The subject exhibits physical and mechanical defiance, including evasive movements to defeat the member's attempt at control, including but not limited to bracing, tensing, pushing, or verbally signaling an intention not to be taken into or retained in custody, provided that the intent to resist has been clearly manifested. Moving on to the next level, we encounter the assaultive subject. This individual has gone beyond the level of simple non-cooperativeness and is actively and aggressively resisting the officer's attempt to arrest. The subject has demonstrated a lack of concern for the member's safety. However, the subject does not pose an immediate threat of death or serious bodily injury to the member or others. Finally, we have the subject who poses a threat of serious injury or death. This subject poses an immediate danger of death or serious physical injury to the member or to another person, but not himself or herself. Member's force response. Cooperative controls are the least physical force response category on the use of force framework. Cooperative controls include communication skills with cooperative subjects and are often achieved by nonverbal acts such as gestures, stance, and facial expressions in accordance with department training and standards. Contact controls involve low-level mental and physical tactics to gain control and cooperation. The contact controls can be psychologically manipulative, for example, strong verbal persuasion, as well as physical, like soft empty hand control, firm grip, and escorting. They can include additional verbal persuasion skills or waiting for backup to show strength in numbers in accordance with department training and standards. Compliance techniques refer to actions such as control holds, joint locks, and oleoresin capsicum, OC, spray, solo, or team takedowns, that may induce pain or cause discomfort to the subject who is actively resisting until control is achieved. These techniques will not generally cause an injury when used in accordance with department training and standards. Defensive tactics involve actions to forcibly render the subject into submission. However, these actions are not likely nor designed to cause death or serious physical injury. The purpose of defensive tactics is primarily the safety of the member and others. Examples of defensive tactics include the use of ASP baton strikes, chemical agents, and electronic control devices, or ECDs, in accordance with department training and standards. Deadly force refers to any use of force likely to cause death or serious physical injury. The primary purpose of deadly force is to neutralize a subject who poses an immediate threat of death or serious injury to the member or others. However, this does not include a subject who poses a threat solely to himself or herself. Examples include, but are not limited to, the use of a firearm or a strike to the head with a hard object. In response to a perceived threat, members shall apply the proportionate and objectively reasonable force response, as outlined in the use of force framework. To ensure the force response is objectively reasonable and proportionate to the perceived threat, members shall continuously assess the threat and develop strategies, consider their authority and department policies, identify options and contingencies, take action and review, and gather information. This approach requires members to consider the seriousness of the crime, the level of threat or resistance presented by the suspect, the imminence of danger, the suspect's mental capacity, his or her access to weapons, agency policies, and available options, such as calling upon members with specialized training for assistance. Members shall initiate the proportionate and objectively reasonable force response when feasible to overcome resistance. Modify their level of force in relation to the amount of resistance offered by a suspect. As the subject offers less resistance, the member shall lower the amount or type of force used. Conversely, if resistance escalates, members are authorized to respond in an objectively reasonable manner. Intervene in and subsequently report any use of force incident in which they observe another member utilizing excessive force or engaging in any type of misconduct. Members shall not use techniques or defensive weapons when employing force unless they have received the requisite training, and the technique or weapon has been approved for use by the department. However, members may employ force as necessary to protect the life of a civilian or member subject to the imminent threat of death or serious physical injury, when no other options are feasible, and the force is objectively reasonable and proportionate to the perceived threat. Conditions that may authorize the use of non-deadly force. A member's decision to use non-deadly force shall involve one or more of the following considerations: to protect life or property, to make a lawful arrest, to prevent the escape of a person in custody, to control a situation or subdue and restrain a resisting individual, or to effect a lawful stop of a fleeing individual. A member shall use the force response that is reasonably necessary to bring the situation under control. If de-escalation tactics are not effective, the member may use an increasing level of force to overcome the level of resistance, as long as the force response remains proportionate to the perceived threat. As soon as the incident is under control, the member's use of force response shall diminish proportionally. Conditions that may authorize the use of deadly force. Authorized use of deadly force, defense of life. Members may use deadly force in the performance of police duties under the following circumstances: when it is necessary and objectively reasonable, and to defend themselves or another from an actual or threatened attack that is imminent and could result in death or serious bodily injury, and when all other options have been exhausted or do not reasonably lend themselves to the circumstances. Fleeing felon. To apprehend a fleeing felon only when every other reasonable means of effecting the arrest or preventing the escape has been exhausted, and the suspect fleeing poses an immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm to the member or others, or there is probable cause to believe the crime committed or attempted was a felony that involved an actual or threatened attack that could result in death or serious bodily harm, and there is probable cause to believe the person fleeing committed or attempted to commit the crime, and failure to immediately apprehend the person places a member or the public in immediate danger of death or serious bodily injury, and the lives of innocent persons will not be endangered if deadly force is used. Unauthorized use of deadly force. Members shall not use deadly force in any circumstance other than those outlined in Part 4. Members shall not utilize deadly force against subjects that only present a threat of harm to themselves. Less lethal weapons. The objective of less lethal weapons is to preserve human life and prevent further escalation of force. Less lethal weapons may only be used by members with the appropriate specialized training. During instances of civil disobedience, members shall follow use of force procedures outlined in Department SOP 1601, handling First Amendment assemblies and mass demonstrations. Positional asphyxia precautions. In order to avoid asphyxiation, members shall, whenever possible, avoid tactics that may impede a subject's ability to breathe, result in chest or throat compressions, or airway blockage. Position the individual in a manner to allow free breathing once the subject has been controlled and placed under custodial restraint, using handcuffs or other authorized methods. Seek medical assistance immediately if a person appears to be having difficulty breathing or is otherwise demonstrating life-threatening symptoms. An official shall direct that alternative means to maintain custody be utilized if appropriate. Members are prohibited from placing a person in a prone position, that is, lying face down, for a prolonged period of time or during transport except during exigent circumstances. Prisoners shall be carefully monitored while in a prone position, as a prone position may be a contributing factor to cause a prisoner to suffocate, also referred to as positional asphyxiation. The use of neck restraints of any kind, including but not limited to The use of trachea holds and carotid artery holds, as they are defined in DC Official Code Section 5125.02, are not authorized use of force options and are prohibited. Members are reminded of the legal restrictions against certain types of neck restraints outlined in DC Official Code Section 5125.01 at CQ, and that members who use a trachea hold or carotid artery hold may be found in violation of the law. In the event that a member employs a neck restraint or chokehold of any kind, he or she shall request emergency medical services immediately. When feasible, members shall identify themselves as a police officer and issue a verbal warning before discharging a firearm. No member shall discharge his or her firearm under the following circumstances: as a warning, into a crowd, in a felony case which does not involve an actual attack but involves a threatened attack, unless the member has reasonable cause to believe the threatened attack is imminent and could result in death or serious bodily injury, in any misdemeanor offense, unless under exceptional circumstances, solely to protect property interests, or to stop an individual on mere suspicion of a crime simply because the individual flees. Members shall not discharge their firearms either at or from a moving vehicle unless deadly force is being used against the member or another person. For purposes of this order, a moving vehicle is not considered deadly force except when it is reasonable to believe that the moving vehicle is being used to conduct a vehicle ramming attack. Members shall, as a rule, avoid tactics that could place them in a position where a vehicle could be used against them. No member shall draw and point a firearm at or in the direction of another person unless there is a reasonable perception of a substantial risk that the situation may escalate to the point where deadly force would be permitted. When it is determined that the use of deadly force is not necessary, as soon as practicable, firearms shall be secured or holstered. Drawing and pointing a firearm at or in the direction of a person is a reportable incident, and members shall notify an official in accordance with SO 0606. Instructions for completing the reportable incident form, RIFE, PD Forms 901G and 901H. In accordance with Go-RAR-901.01, Handling of Service Weapons, no member of the department shall carry, use or discharge any unauthorized ammunition in their issued service weapons. Members shall not obtain service ammunition from any source except through official department channels. Members are further required to carry only the requisite amount of service ammunition as applicable to the authorized service weapon they are utilizing. Members shall not, in the normal exercise of their responsibilities, carry, use or discharge any firearm or other weapon, except those issued or approved for use by the MPD under direction of the Chief of Police. Members shall not carry any department-issued weapon prior to successfully completing department-approved training courses directed by the Chief of Police. Members are reminded the proper application and general wearing of handcuffs may lead to complaints of minor pain or injury, such as pinching of skin or scratches. When a subject complains of pain or injury that is associated with the application or wearing of handcuffs, members shall notify an official. If the investigating official determines the subject's injury or complaint of pain is exclusively the result of the application and wearing of handcuffs, no further force-related investigation or reporting is necessary. For example, a member places handcuffs on a non-resistant subject. The subject claims the handcuffs are causing him discomfort, but the official concludes the pain is due exclusively to discomfort associated with wearing handcuffs. If the investigating official determines the subject's injury or complaint of pain is not exclusively the result of the application and wearing of handcuffs or force was required to apply the handcuffs, he or she shall initiate a use of force investigation in accordance with Go-RAR-901.08, Use of Force Investigations. Investigating officials shall provide counseling and conduct an administrative investigation as appropriate for policy violations in cases where, based on the totality of circumstances, a member applied the handcuffs improperly, but the associated injury does not warrant a use of force investigation. For example, the arresting member places handcuffs on an unresisting subject but neglects to activate the double lock function. Since the handcuffs are not double locked, the subject inadvertently tightens them on himself while he is transported back to the station. The tightening of the handcuffs results in a minor rash on the prisoner's right wrist. This injury is due to the wearing of handcuffs and is therefore not a reportable use of force. However, it would not have occurred if the member had applied the handcuffs properly. Members are prohibited from employing any use of force technique or defensive weapon against a subject in handcuffs unless the subject is engaged in assaultive behavior as described in this order, or the subject is attempting to escape police custody, or resisting members' efforts to maintain custody of the individual. For example, the subject will not get out of the transport vehicle. In these cases, members shall limit their force responses to the minimum amount of force that the objectively reasonable officer would use in light of the circumstances to effectively bring an incident or person under control. Civilian employees of the department are prohibited from receiving or carrying department-issued weapons of any kind. Note: civilian employees may handle weapons when required as part of their assigned duties. For example, civilian firearm instructors, civilian firearm examination technicians, or civilian evidence technicians. Reporting use of force incidents. All incidents involving a reportable use of force as defined in Part 3, Section 13. A of this order shall be reported in accordance with SO 1014, Instructions for Completing the Use of Force Incident Report, PD Forms 901E and 901F. All reportable force incidents shall be reported in accordance with SO 0606, Instructions for Completing the Reportable Incident Form, PD Forms 901G and 901H. Example 1. A member uses OC spray on a subject. This is a reportable use of force and requires the completion of a PD Form 901E, commonly referred to as a UFIR, in accordance with SO 1014. Example 2. A member employs a takedown technique to bring a resistive subject to the ground so he or she can be placed in handcuffs. The takedown and handcuffing does not result in injury or complaint of pain or injury. The use of a takedown is a reportable force incident and requires the completion of a PD Form 901G, commonly referred to as a RIAF, in accordance with SO 0606. Members who are aware of a complaint regarding the use of force by another member shall notify their supervisor. Attachments. Attachment A, decision-making model. Attachment B, use of force framework. Directives and DC Official Code. Go Ops 304.10, Police Citizen Contacts, Stops and Frisks. Go PCA 502.07, Medical Treatment and Hospitalization of Prisoners. Go RAR 901.01, Handling of Service Weapons. SO 0606, Instructions for Completing the Reportable Incident Form, PD Forms 901G and 901H. SO 1014, Instructions for Completing the Use of Force Incident Report, PD Forms 901E and 901F. SOP 1601, Handling First Amendment Assemblies and Mass Demonstrations. DC Official Code, Section 5125, Limitation on Chokeholds. Training is repetition. Remember, all instructors are not the same. Call or text 301-3462-327. Master Instructor Kenneth Thorne.